Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lauer, and in today's episode, well, guess what? It's more in our A+ series, and you kind of figured that was coming. You didn't have to be a psychic to figure that out, right? You hit the button, you know you're in A+. We just want to verify that you're actually there. Joining us back in the studio to help continue in that endeavor, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, welcome back, man. How's it going today?
Man, it's going great. Looking to continue on in our part 2 of the Windows security settings. And in the first part, we were talking about, well, really about permissions, right? We were talking about NTFS permissions, and we were showing you a little bit about what happens when you copy files and when you move files. Keep in mind that it will change the way the permissions are applied to your different resources like files and folders. Now, we also got to talk about some additional permissions as well. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to dive in and really continue right where we left off, and we're going to talk about what are known as share permissions. Now, you might have seen in earlier episodes we have been we've actually been using one of our servers to share resources out, and we've kind of shown you guys how to browse to them. Remember, that's through the Universal Naming Convention, the UNC path, / computer name / whatever the share name is. Well, we also have to keep in mind that we can control access to those shared resources as well, and as administrators, you really should control access to just about any resource, whether it is local on the machine or whether you're going across the network and you're accessing it. Now, what do I mean when I say local? Well, when I say local, I mean quite literally you're sitting at the Windows computer where that device or where that resource is, you log into the local machine, and it is on the local hard drive, right? That's where NTFS permissions apply. But we also have to understand that when you connect over the network as well, and you connect to, let's say, that server where we've got our network share, that NTFS permissions also apply there too. But then we stack on that, again on top of it, some additional permissions, and those are known as share permissions. Let's go ahead, and we're going to dive right in here. Let's go to our Windows server here where we've got this share, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do some modifications to, well, the file that I've shared out, or the folder, I should say, that I've shared out. Remember that you share folders. The only way to share a file is to first create a shared folder and to put that file in there. There's no way to share files individually. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we'll dive into local disk C here, and we're going to look at the ACL, and we'll just right-click. I say ACL, remember that's your permissions list, and we find that from the Security tab when we right-click on the folder, and we choose Properties, and then Security. And if we dive right in here, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add Dan to this ACL. I'm going to add Dan to the permissions list here real quick.
Wes.
That's right. Let's give him access, right? And even
totally
more so,
deleting all these files.
that's right, they're gone. Don't put any of your MP3s up there, right? He's going to delete them all.
Collection for me.
Right. So we'll go ahead, and what we're going to do is we'll add Dan to that permissions list, and we'll find his name in the directory, and we'll go ahead and just do a check names here, and there he is, right? And notice that he's now in the list. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give Dan full control, right?
Your second mistake.
I know, exactly, because he told me he's going to delete everything. Why don't I just give him full control and let him mess everything up, right?
That's right.
So we'll go ahead and we'll choose OK to that, and now he has full control. Now, let's go ahead and let's move over to our other machine, right, that we've been using. And in this case, I'm just going to use our Windows 8.1 machine. Keep in mind that this would be the same thing in Vista if you happen to be using it, or Windows 8, or Windows 7 for that matter. And we'll go ahead and we'll log in as Dan, and that'll be D. Lowry, I believe, is how I set up his username. And we'll log in. Yep, there we go. All right. Kind of funny, I can log in better as Dan than I can myself here. So we'll go ahead. We're going to browse to that network share. Now remember, I gave him full control. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll open up our File Explorer here. Remember our UNC path? Remember how we got to that? I told you it was // whatever the computer name is, / the share name. And in this case, you can see the UNC path. So understand what's going on here, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that we're connecting across the network from our Windows 8.1 machine back to this file server, and essentially we are connecting to the share. All right, now, in earlier episodes, we threw a Microsoft Remote Assistance invitation in here, but I'm going to go ahead, since we gave Dan full control, and we're going to just right-click here on our, in this folder, and we're going to create a new file. All right, so we're just going to use our right-click options here. We'll choose New, and we're going to choose a text document. Wait a second here, and it's giving me a problem. I seem to have an issue going on here, and you'll notice it says Destination Folder Access Denied. Well, what's going on here? I just gave Dan full control, right? Why can't he create a file in this folder if he's got full control, right? I said, hey, I want you to be able to just do whatever you want. In fact, he says, you know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these files. All right, and he deletes the files, and wait a second. You need permission to perform the action. Wait a second here. I just gave him full control. What's going on? Now, I want you to understand the difference between local permissions and shared permissions, okay? Local permissions are if he was to log into the file server locally, sitting in front of it, he would have full control, and just like Dan said, he'd be able to wreak havoc if he wanted to on anything that's within that folder. But when you compound share permissions, when you apply share permissions here, you've got another set of permissions that you have to keep in mind as well. All right, so let's go ahead and let's just bump back on over to our file server here, and let's go ahead and look and see what's going on with the share permission. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right-click on that folder, and we're going to choose Properties. But this time, instead of choosing the Security tab, well, you guys are smart. You gals are smart out there, right? We're going to go to the Sharing tab this time. All right, and here's where I can see that network path, right? The UNC path, // computer name, / share name. All right. And we're going to look at the sharing permissions. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do sharing permissions inside of Windows, right? You have what's known as the basic sharing interface, or wizard. It's not really a wizard, but if you will. And you also have advanced sharing. Let's go ahead and look at the basic sharing first. All right? Now, notice something. When I look at basic sharing, it does look like Dan has some level of access to this share. But we can see that technically he doesn't, right? And let's find out why. Let me go to the advanced sharing tab. And if we look at permissions, notice that even though on the surface it looks like Dan has some kind of permissions, he has local permissions. He doesn't have any of the permissions that are needed to modify, make changes to any file or folder within this shared resource. And that's something to keep in mind. Notice that there's read permission. And read permission, he can read the documents. Notice that he could see the fact that the invitation file was there. But he doesn't have change, and change is essentially kind of like an NTFS modify permission. Now, with share permissions, it's a little bit easier because we don't have all those individual permissions. We only have 3 permissions. We have full control, we have change, and we have read. All right, so if he's got full control NTFS permissions, why isn't he able to do anything to this folder or create files within the folder when he's reaching across the network? And that's because when you combine share permissions with NTFS permissions, all right, you get the most restrictive permission. Notice that the share permission we have set to everybody here says read. So when you combine that with NTFS permissions of full control, which one is more restrictive, full control or read? Well, guess what? It's a read permission. And that's why that is applying. So you have to understand how share permissions apply to NTFS permissions when you are accessing a folder or shared resource over the network. Keep in mind that I don't care what side of the tracks it is. All right, if you have NTFS read permission and I turn around and I give Dan full control share permissions, the same rule applies. The most restrictive is going to win out. So let's go ahead and let's change this around a little bit, right? I'm going to give him change permission. I'll give everyone change permissions, and we do this a lot. And here's why I say. Best practice is a lot of times it gets kind of hard to tell when you have resource access problems what's going on, which permission's causing the conflict. So a lot of times what you'll see is people will give everyone full control share permissions, and then what they do is they restrict the access level based on the NTFS permissions, right? Because it doesn't matter what side of the tracks is more restrictive, right? When you access a resource over the network, a share, it's going to be the most restrictive. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to do change permission.
Wes, I would really think that that would work out as well as if not only if you're accessing through share permissions, but if you are now locally sitting at the machine, now you have your proper NTFS permission. You don't even have to worry about share permissions. Everything's set just right at that point.
When it comes to troubleshooting, Dan, that's absolutely correct because which side of the tracks is causing the problem, right? I know which side of the tracks is causing the problem.
It's always the same side.
It's always the same side.
Just make it that way.
Right? So keep in mind, Microsoft will tell you actually go ahead and peek and tweak these, but a lot of people in the real world out there that are doing administrations will just restrict with NTFS. So let's go ahead and let's apply this setting, and we'll choose close. And the great thing about permissions is permissions are immediate. It's not like some of the configuration settings that you apply within a corporate network like a GPO. When that happens, sometimes you have to log out of the machine, you have to log back into the machine. Now, I will say one thing that you have to keep in mind if you're troubleshooting permissions is that when the user logs into the machine, the Windows machine creates what's known as an SID, a SID. It's a security identifier, and that contains all the permissions that are granted to the user, if you will, as well as the groups that they're in. So if I made a modification to Dan's group membership, right, and that would give him more access or more restrictive access, in order for that to apply to his account, he'd actually have to log off to the machine and then log back onto the machine. So there is a case in which you might have to log off and log on to see newly applied permissions, and that usually has to do with a group membership change, because that security identifier is generated at the time the person logs on to the machine itself. Now, if I right-click and I choose New this time, notice that now we got Dan's text document, right? So notice now, and I'll just call it Dan right here, we now have a text document that he can gain access to, all right? And that's because you got to keep in mind, right, that share permissions and NTFS permissions applied together is always the most restrictive. So those are a couple of things that you want to worry about, all right? Now, notice that Dan can make modifications, right? So if I right-click on this, this document that we just created, I choose Open, and we'll put this is Dan's text, and we'll go ahead and save that, right? And if I open it up, I can add additional text here. This is more of Dan's text. We're picking on Dan today. Text, right? So notice that his account can now make modifications to this file, right? I want to show you something, because now I'm going to throw a curveball at you. All right, we have to talk about what are known as file attributes. All right, when we look at file attributes, there are some things that you have to be aware of. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I'll tell you what we'll do is I'm not restricted. I got Dan set up as a standard user here, which I really should make him an administrator. He's far from the standard user. But I'll go ahead and sign out here, and I'm going to log back in as our administrator. So let me go ahead and do that, because there's a couple of commands that I want to show you, and I don't want any administrative privileges or rights getting in the way here. So we'll go ahead and we'll log back in as the administrator, and we're going to fire up our, well, I tell you what, we'll do this for the graphical user interface. We're going to do it from the command prompt as well. So you have inside of Windows, you have what are known as file attributes. And let me go ahead and create a document here, and I'll just call it A+, and I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to choose Properties. Now, let me go ahead and kind of zoom in here and show you. Notice these attributes that are down here. You have attributes, file attributes, that are assigned to files that tell the Windows subsystem what to do with this file, all right? And you'll see a few here right away, right? We'll see read-only, we'll see hidden, and if I choose advanced, there are some additional ones here too. So for instance, if you'll see the one that says this file is ready for archiving. That's actually a file attribute as well as an index attribute. Now, an index attribute is one that's specific to Windows that allows the Windows search subsystem find this file faster. However, keep in mind, indexing, it can be beneficial on large drives. However, if you index everything, you're not really going to see any performance benefit of this, because if everything is indexed, well, it still means that the search functionality has to search through every single file within the drive. There are also some special attributes that are assigned by the NTFS file system. I know it's a little redundant there, but and that's the compression and encryption attribute. Compression attribute flags it to be compressed to save the on-disk size. I will tell you the encryption attribute is interesting, because the encryption attribute allows you to use something known as EFS, the encrypted file system, and this allows you to scramble the contents of the file so that if Dan says, hey, you know what, I've got some information in here and I don't want anybody to be able to see it, he can go ahead and he can flag it with EFS. It encrypts that file, and only the owner can actually view the file itself. All right, so let's kind of show you what I mean here with it telling you what the file attribute tells the Windows subsystem what to do. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to choose hidden, and I want you to pay attention When I choose hidden, let me go ahead and move this file down just a little bit so you guys can see that when I zoom in here. I want you to notice what happens when I apply the hidden attribute.
It hides.
It hides. It disappears, right? And that's because it tells File Explorer, in this case, if you're in Windows 7 and before, it would have been Windows Explorer. It says, you know what? I don't want you guys to see this. It's got the hidden attribute. Let's go ahead and remove it from the graphical user interface. Now, that being said, let me go ahead and I'll say OK to this. And what I want to do is I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose Command Prompt. And I'm going to go ahead and choose an administrative command prompt. It looks like I should have modified the font here a little bit. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and just make that a little bit easier to see. Kind of hard to see out there. All right, and here we go. All right, so make it a little bit easier for you all to see out there. All right, and we'll give her a little bit more real estate here in our command prompts. Now, I have to navigate to this location, and we're going to use a command called attrib, the attrib command. That's A-T-T-R-I-B. So let's go ahead and let's navigate to the location in which we are right now. And I'm on the desktop. So here we are on the desktop in the command prompt. And if I choose ATTRIB and I run that, I will see that I have two files here. All right. Now, both of these files are kind of hidden, which is kind of interesting. All right. You have an easy way to remember the file attributes, right? If you can remember a little saying, every file can get a rash, you can remember read only, archive, system, and hidden. Now there's a couple other attributes. Rashi, I don't know, can get a Rashi. I is indexed, and then you also have a compression and encryption attribute too. Like I said, the encryption attribute flags it to the NTFS file system to encrypt with EFS, or the encrypted file system. Now, you can also remove and modify your attributes with the attrib command. So for instance, I could say ATTRIB, or A+, and keep in mind you have to spell out the full name here. I have to do the .txt, and I can do a minus sign, and I can do H. All right, and when I do that, what I should see is that that file comes back to the surface here, right? Now, I want to also show you one scenario in which attributes trump permissions. All right, so if I right-click on the file here and I look at Properties and I look at the Security tab, notice that the administrator, right, I am the administrator, and it lets me have full control, and this is my file, so I'm the creator, owner, has full control. But also notice that the administrators themselves, they also have full control. That means that I should be able to come in here and put text, right? And I should be able to save it, and we'll go ahead and close, once it's saved, close it down. Right, and there's my text. My text is in the document itself. Now, if I take the attrib command, or we could do this for the graphical user interface with a little checkbox, but I don't know which one they might ask you on the exam, so no both. I can do an ATTRIB, and then I can do a plus R to the, and let me name the file first, a+.txt here, and then a plus R. Let's see what kind of happens here. In fact, let me go ahead and run the attrib command. If you run it by itself, attrib, it'll give you all the files in the current directory that you're located, and all the attributes. You can also specify this, so I can put a full path to the file that I want to find out what the attributes are. So you understand that I'm just kind of doing this generically. If I was at C: here, I could actually put the full path, and it would tell me what the attribute of the file is. Notice that I can see Archive. Archive lets the Windows backup subsystem know that, hey, I don't have a copy of this file, and next time the backup runs, if it sees that archive bit, it's going to say, oh, you don't have a current copy of this file. Let me go ahead and include it in your next backup. When you run a full backup, it actually clears the archive bits, and it lets the backup subsystem know, oh, you got a current copy of this. If you modify a file or you create a file, since the last time a full backup runs, it automatically flags the archive attribute, sometimes called the archive bit, to let the backup subsystem know, hey, you don't have a current copy of this. It was either created since the last backup, or it's been modified since the last backup, so you need to include it. So that's why you see the A here. S is the system attribute, and the system attribute lets the Windows subsystem know that, hey, this is a system file. Now, understand the attribute I can put on this A+ TXT file up here in the corner, I could put the S attribute there, right? And if I put the S attribute on it, it's going to tell the Windows subsystem, hey, this is a system file, even though it's just a text document that I just created. So again, remember, these attributes tell the Windows subsystem, this is what you do with the file. Now remember, I did flag the read-only attribute on this file, and if I right-click on this file again, keep in mind, I am an administrator, I am the owner of this file, and I should have full control. But now that I've got the read-only attribute, let me go ahead and I'm going to try to modify. I'm going to put more text. Oops, let's try that again. More text, and I'm going to save it. Notice what happens. Notice that it says save as. I didn't get the automatically just saving it, all right? And if I say, okay, I want to save it as TXT, it's going to ask me, hey, this already exists. Do you want to replace it? And I'll say, sure, yes. Notice what happens. It says that this file is set to read-only. I want you to keep in mind, and this is an exam alert, that read-only attribute, I don't care what your permissions are. It trumps the local permissions, and it also trumps the share permissions as well. So even though I have full control, that archive attribute tells the Windows backup subsystem, do not let anybody modify this. You're not going to make changes to it. All right, and that is important, so do keep that in mind. So that's a little bit about your attributes, and it is something that you want to be aware of. Now, we've talked a little bit about files and folders. I've mentioned some of the permissions. We talked about permission propagation, they say in the first episode. Understand that there's also inheritance. If I set a permission, like I said in the first part of this, I said if you set it on the folder level and I put a file in it, it automatically propagates or inherits down to subfolders and files within that folder. But I also want you to know, they call out on the exam what's known as, and let me not save this and get out of here for a second. I want you to know of system files and folders, right? The system attribute is one of the things that lets the Windows subsystem know, hey, you've got to protect this file, right? Windows does a pretty good job of protecting itself so that people can't make modifications to system files and cause some kind of irreversible damage to their to the machine or to the operating system. Now, that being said, just when I say that, you'll find plenty of users that'll go click happy and they'll find ways to break your operating system. But for the most part, Windows is trying to protect itself, and you can usually see that if I get down in here into File Explorer, Windows Explorer, if you're in an earlier operating system, and Local Disk C, you can see we have a series of system files. Program files are exactly what it sounds like. Remember, these are your application folders. The x86, we've talked about this in earlier episodes. That's your 32-bit applications, and program files without the x86 are your 64-bit applications. But inside of Windows, all right, this is where where our Windows files and folders are. I'm glad I could teach you that. But what I mean more importantly, though, is this is where the important, crucial files and folders are for the operating system. So let me go ahead and show you just one location that might come up a lot. All right, we have System and System32. And again, with System32, a lot of your important files are here. You'll see things like, for instance, your drivers. Drivers are very, very important. All the drivers that are built into the operating system are right here. So again, keep in mind that your system files are protected, right? Your operating system needs these in order to do its just normal functionality. So those are a couple of the things that you want to be aware of. Again, be aware of system files and folders. Again, they are protected. And when you do things like, for instance, when you run system restore, so we'll take system restore, right? If I'm going to make a modification or install a driver, or I'm going to install an application, what ends up happening is your system restore takes that point-in-time snapshot of your files and folders, and what's going on there is it's essentially basically putting all of your system files in a read-only copy, and it's putting them to the side so that if you make modifications or changes, you can restore them to that earlier point in time. So again, keep in mind that system files are very, very important. Now, Dan, I do have a few additional things that we got to kind of take a look at, but it looks like I've kind of run the gamut on this one. We might have to put a comma in this episode.
Well, there's no problem with that. We're more than happy to accommodate my good friend Wes. We do thank you for dropping by today and getting us thus far. Looking forward to that part 3. So join us there. Definitely check that out to round out what we can do inside of Windows when it comes to security. That being said, we're going to go ahead and sign off for this episode. For IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.